You. It's great to be with you. I have to confess, I always like the second. There's something about the second service because you've had more. It's probably because you had more caffeine by the time the second service starts. The title of my talk, which is based on this last book of mine, American Beta, is what we can learn from the East. But as I was driving down here at some ungodly hour this morning from LA, it occurred to me that I could just as easily have titled it What We Have Learned from the East, because everybody in this room has been impacted by the spiritual teachings that were born in ancient India and have come down to us in different forms over the years. And I say that with great confidence. One reason is as I look out on your youthful faces, I know that despite the youthful appearance, many of you started your spiritual path in the 60s and 70s and were influenced probably by some of the gurus who were coming in and out of America, and the books that were left behind, and maybe you took up Zen, or maybe you took up TM when the Beatles went to India, or maybe you went to India yourself and lived in an ashram. But mostly I know that you have been impacted by India, whether you know it or not, because you're here. And because the founders of all the New Thought traditions, including this one, were profoundly influenced by the spiritual teachings of the East as they were formulating what would become their teachings, using their own insights, their own remarkable insights, other sources, but the teachings of the East were an integral part of that. And it comes down to you today in the form of religious science or unity churches and all these others. American transmissions of the ancient teachings. I don't know how many of you know Ernest Holmes's biographical data, but you know probably that he was, as a young man, deeply impacted by Ralph Waldo Emerson. What you may not know is how much Emerson was influenced by India. He and his father were among the early sort of, what's the phrase in technology? Early adoption, early adopters, what is it? They were among the early ones to be reading the first good translations and commentaries of about Hinduism and Buddhism, the first translations of the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads, and they were transformed by these books. And Emerson's philosophy is deeply colored by the impact of these Vedic texts, as was Thoreau and Walt Whitman and all the other transcendentalists who influenced people like Madame Blavatsky, who started Theosophy, and Mary Baker Eddy, who started Christian Science, who in turn influenced young Ernest Holmes. So he, from the beginning, was getting a taste of India secondhand through these other sources, and then later, as he evolved, the influence was more direct as he came into contact with Eastern spiritual teachings, and later when he lived in LA with the gurus and yoga masters who were around in the early part of the 20th century, in the 20s and 30s and 40s. He was, for example, coexisting in LA on Sunday mornings with Paramahansa Yogananda And the two of them apparently knew each other well and had meals together and so forth. I'm going to read a section from Ernest Holmes' brother Fenwick's writings about Ernest. And he says that Ernest's philosophy was, quote, a synthesis into one harmonious whole of the teachings of Emerson and Thomas Troward, the religions of East and West, the spiritual tenets of Christian Science and New Thought, together with whatever he knew or could learn of the various depositories of ancient wisdom. And he singles out the Bhagavad Gita. Holmes, and I discovered all this when researching American Veda, and so there's more detail in there. In a 1958 lecture to some of his New Thought students, he said that New Thought, quote, had its roots in a very deep antiquity. And he singled out the ancient sages of India and said that they believed in one God and only one. They didn't call it God. They called it the Absolute or Brahman, but it doesn't matter what you call it. They believed in one presence and one power and only one in the universe. They believed in the mind that sleeps in the mineral, waves in the grass, wakes to simple consciousness in the animal, to self-consciousness in the human, and to cosmic consciousness in what they call the upper hierarchies or an ascending scale of evolution. So he got it. He got what the essence of the Hindu and Buddhist teachings were. He combined it with his own insights into the nature of the mind, other sources, and we have science of mind. The same is true, and I should add that later he got deeply into certain of the Indian masters, particularly Sri Aurobindo, who you can Google or read about in my book. And when Sri Aurobindo's masterwork, The Life Divine, was what Ernest Holmes was reading when he passed in 1960, I think. Yeah. Also, check out his last book, The Voice Celestial, and you'll see the subtitle is Thou Art That, which is the great classic Mahavakya, which means great utterance of the Upanishads. Thou art that. The point is that India's deep and profound spiritual legacy was one of the most important influences on religious science, and the same is true of the other New Thought schools. So I'm going to... Unity churches, the founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, who were younger than Ernest Holmes, in the second issue of their magazine in 1889, at a time when only one of the famous gurus to come to America had even appeared, in that issue, which later became Unity Magazine, there's this very provocative passage that I came upon while doing research for my book. Fillmore writes that, quote, the Christian religion has answered our needs up to the present age, but the evolution of the spirit has created a demand for a religion of broader scope, and we turn to the lore of India for lack of a better system nearer home. He called the East the nursery of spiritual philosophies and the storehouse of a spiritual life that we cannot adequately comprehend in our present material thought environment. So both science of mind and New Thought have deep roots in the wisdom that came from India and from the East in general, and took on these classic American formulations as they were added to and nuanced for our great use. So, right now, all over the country on Sunday mornings, tens or hundreds of thousands of people are at a New Thought church like this, in some sanctuary, and they're hearing sermons, and they're chanting traditional songs, and they're doing affirmations, and they're doing all these things. Some taste of India is in that, and whether they know it or not. And that's what's been happening in America for over 200 years, and that's what I chronicle in American Veda, because it's not just New Thought. New Thought just gets one chapter. These teachings have been flowing here through books and gurus and yoga masters and swamis and scholars and all kinds of other people, artists, ever since the days when Emerson was a child. They come in different streams, different tributaries, one of which, of course, was the famous gurus who came here, from Swami Vivekananda in the 1890s to Yogananda in the 20s and onward, to the big explosion of Indian teachings in the 1960s and 70s with people like Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and his transcendental meditation, and Swami Satchidananda and Swami Muktananda, and on and on and on. But it came also through prominent Americans, not just religious leaders like Holmes and Fillmore, but others who absorbed these teachings and whose lives were changed by these teachings and adapted them to their own forms of expertise, and then became transmitters of these teachings in various ways. So anybody who's read Aldous Huxley, or the textbooks written by the great scholar Houston Smith, who wrote the foreword to my book, and or Joseph Campbell, or who read certain poems of T.S. Eliot or W.B. Yeats, or who read the novels of J.D. Salinger or Hermann Hesse, or who studied psychology, the self-actualization psychology or transpersonal psychology started by Abraham Maslow, or read certain physicists, or read certain other kinds of scholars, or who listened to certain music, who listened to Ravi Shankar in the 60s, or listened to John Coltrane, later Coltrane, or, of course, the Beatles and George Harrison. And I have to say, that moment when the Beatles took up meditation and went to India is one of the most important moments in spiritual history, because East and West came together with this big explosion of mass media and changed all our lives. And that's when we first heard the words mantra and guru and ashram and all that. And it was so important that I start my book with it, and I sometimes give talks just about the Beatles, which is a lot of fun, of course, because you get to hear some cool music. But the point is that these teachings came through and started to permeate American soil so that it vastly changed the spiritual landscape we live in, even for people who have never been to a New Thought church or even think they're being influenced by India. Even very secular people whose doctors tell them to meditate, or whose psychotherapist tells them to do yoga, or who just take up these teachings for self-improvement. They have permeated secular and spiritual life to such an extent that I don't think spirituality and religion in America will ever be the same. And we can thank the universe for that. We owe a great debt to India, and the reason for it is it's very compatible with American values. Americans are pragmatic. These teachings make sense, and they work. We adopt them. We adapt them. We assimilate them. Americans we value pluralism and diversity, so the core teachings that you saw expressed here today with the candle lighting and some of the song lyrics, the notion that there is one ultimate source, one divine power in the universe, and that we are that. And we can come to that through any variety of pathways and traditions. This is core Vedic teachings. They were written in the Rig Veda thousands of years ago. We are now coming to that realization in a big way, and the New Thought communities are a big part of that transmission. These teachings, these perennial teachings, whether we get them directly from India or through New Thought or any other form of expression, have changed the way we understand who we are and what we are and how we fit in the universe, what we know of as God, how we define God, whether we use the word God or not. We have come to understand that our inner, deepest nature is divine. Someone once said that we have moved from original sin to original bliss. What we are is divine. And that ultimate reality that the Upanishads express as, I am that, thou art that, all this is that, and that you expressed here in good old American English this morning. This is a transformation in how we understand religion and spirituality. You know, this fastest growing cohort in American religious categories is spiritual but not religious. That to me would be unthinkable if we hadn't had these teachings from the East that gave us ways to be spiritual outside of the confines of conventional religion. And it has now found its way into even healthcare and psychology, because in the late 60s and 70s, the scientists of America were smart enough to say, all these people practicing meditation, doing yoga, something's going on here, let's study it. And the research mushroomed to the point there's thousands of studies, and now it's just part of American life, because the people in the East were wise enough to be good custodians of these esoteric practices that we also had in the Western religious traditions, but somehow let fade into the vaults of esoteric monasteries out of people's use, but they are now coming back. You see contemplative Christian practices, the practices of Jewish mysticism, Sufism, they are all coming out and being democratized and revived and adapted once again because of the catalyst that the teachers from the East provided. That's, after all, what yoga is. Yoga, this big yoga craze, is yoga means union, the union of the individual and the divine, the unfolding of our own divine nature. Unfortunately, yoga has come to be synonymous with physical practices, but the deep yoga is compatible with what you hear today in New Thought churches. To segue into the piece of this, which is about what we can still learn from the East, it is a useful reminder to remember that the essence of these great teachings is extremely practical. It's like the old joke, guy comes up to someone in New York, says, how do I get to Carnegie Hall? And the answer is practice. Practice, practice, practice. This is not just philosophy. This is not just ideas. It's not theological speculation. These teachings are put into our lives in a practical way through practice. And the East has preserved those practices. The Sanskrit word is sadhana, practice. And it's amazing to me how many people have read everything they can get their hands on about Indian philosophy and yoga and Buddhism, but they don't do anything. They don't practice. They don't have a practice they do at home. People go, 15, 20 million people a year go to yoga classes. It's remarkable how few have a practice outside of when they go to stretch and bend in a hatha yoga class. Even more amazing is how few yoga teachers have a practice that they do, a meditative practice that takes them deep into the unity of their self and big self. That's what India's great sages and all the gurus have come here constantly remind us of. Practice, practice, practice. How do you advance in the spiritual life? Practice. How do you cultivate the powers of mind that we hear about today? Practice. How do we experience unity within ourselves and live it? Practice. Sadhana. And it's extraordinary, the power that comes from practice. Just being here is powerful. Engaging in your own spiritual practice and getting deeper and deeper is a way of enhancing that power, magnifying that power. The Indian sages knew that Jesus was right when he said the kingdom of God is within you, literally within, and that you should seek that first, and then all else will be added unto you. People are so busy these days and so fooled and tricked into thinking if they just do a little more, if they just get a little more, they'll be finally happy and fulfilled. You know better. But it requires going within, getting deeper, uncovering the kingdom within. When people tell me they don't have time to meditate, and sometimes they tell me that with, oh, I feel terrible because I know I should. And I feel, oh, why don't you? And they always talk about how busy they are. So my response is to quote Gandhi. Gandhi was a busy guy. Gandhi had the responsibility of a whole nation trying to overthrow a colonial power. And one day he was quoted as saying, "Today is such a busy day, I'm going to have to meditate for 2 hours instead of just 1. Right? Think about that. That is turning 180 degrees what we normally do. Oh, it's a busy day. I don't have time for spiritual practice. No, he knew that giving it that time is the foundation for doing what he's going to do better, more effectively, with greater power, with greater strength, with greater attunement to the divine intelligence that will make him do things with proper decisions and proper effective action, what is called upaya, skillful means, by harnessing the divine intelligence. So the other source I like to quote is Sri Ramakrishna, who was great 19th century sage of India. It is said that when people came to him for his darshan, to be in his presence, or to ask him for advice, he would sometimes just say one short thing: go deeper, which applies to everybody. So, Gandhi, you don't have time? Give it more time. Or Ramakrishna, go deeper. And to say why, because we know coincidences, so-called, happen. I just got this in the email this morning. People send me quotes. This is from Yogananda, the author of Autobiography of a Yogi. And he says, think of divine abundance as a mighty, refreshing rain whatever receptacle you have at hand will receive it. If you hold a tin cup, you will receive only that quantity. If you hold up a bowl, that will be filled. What kind of receptacle are you holding up to divine abundance? That's where go deeper comes in. That's where practice comes in. I will leave you with that and turn you over to the music, which, as it happens, the next song is the very song my wife and I chose to dance to at our wedding. Namaste.
That was so inspirational. Thank you, Phillip. And now, our wonderful musicians and beautiful singer, and taking us even deeper.
It was Stephen Sondheim that